They say the walls of legacy are built on loyalty. But in my family, those walls were built on hierarchy. And I was born at the bottom. I didn't grow up poor, not in the way that stings your stomach or cracks your shoes, but I grew up overlooked. My last name matched the company's letterhead, sure. But it was my Uncle Lawrence's signature on the contracts, and his son Mason's smile on the investor decks. I was just the niece who liked logistics. From day one, I worked like I had something to prove, because I did. While Mason cruised into the corner office with a fancy business degree and perfectly gelled hair, I started in the warehouse. First shift, 4 a.m. I sorted crates, drove forklifts, memorized supply chain codes by heart. I learned the business from the bottom because no one would let me start at the top, not even my father. He always said, "Real power doesn't need recognition." Elara. But when he passed suddenly, it wasn't power I needed. It was a seat at the table. Instead, the table got longer. More chairs added, but not one with my name. Uncle Lawrence stepped in temporarily. That was the word they used. Temporarily. Then the votes happened. Silent. Slick. Like oil on water. Suddenly, Mason was VP of Operations, despite never setting foot in a real warehouse. And me, I was still at my desk. No title bump. No raise. But I kept showing up, because that's what I was taught, earn it silently. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because I wore the gray blazer my dad loved, the one he said made me look CEO ready. I walked into the boardroom thinking it was a strategy session. Mason was already there, legs crossed, tie loose, smirking. Uncle Lawrence didn't look at me when he slid the folder across the table. "Elara," he said, "we appreciate your years of service, but after a thorough review, we've decided to restructure. Your role is being dissolved effective immediately." Just like that. No warning, no explanation, no gratitude, just a cold-blooded execution, disguised as a business decision. I didn't speak. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just looked down at the paper and read the sentence that would change everything. This termination is not a reflection of performance, but a realignment of vision. Vision. Whose vision? Certainly not mine. I built that supply chain from scratch. I saved them millions in rerouting, but that didn't matter. Not when your last name only counts if it's stamped on the right branch of the family tree. Mason leaned forward then. "Elara," he said, like he was consoling a stray dog. "Maybe it's time you tried something. Smaller. A passion project. Something that fits your style." He meant it as an insult, but all I heard was this: "You're free." I walked out of that building without looking back. No boxes, no farewell party, no fake hugs, just silence. And in that silence, something inside me snapped into place. Not broken, aligned. I didn't go home. I didn't cry into a pint of ice cream like in the movies. I drove straight to my mother's old storage unit, unlocked the rusted latch. Inside were two things. One, my father's journals filled with notes about the company's founding years. Two, three, a blueprint I had sketched 2 years ago, an idea for a streamlined logistics platform, AI-based routing, real-time fulfillment, scalable, efficient, revolutionary. 4, the same idea Mason had laughed at during the last board meeting, the one he said was too ambitious for our brand. That night, I stayed in the storage unit until sunrise, rewriting, mapping, thinking. And when the light cracked through the slats, I made a promise I will never ask them for a seat at their table again. I will build my own. And one day they will beg me to let them sit. It started with a name, Althea, Greek for healer, my middle name, but it also sounded clean, modern, corporate. I used the severance money, not much, but enough to register the company and file patents. I liquidated what I had left in stocks, took a personal loan using my tiny sliver of family shares as collateral. Everyone thought I was crazy. Even my friends said, "Why not just get another job?" But this wasn't about employment. This was about legacy. Mine. 6 months later, I was operating out of a shoebox office above a dry cleaner, 12-hour days, code by night, cold calls by day. I partnered with an underfunded tech startup that had brilliant software but zero business acumen. I offered strategy in exchange for partial ownership. We signed our first contract in month 7. By month 10, we had 3 warehouses under digital transformation, and at month 12, we underbid Halton Logistics, my family's company. We took a deal worth $4.7 million right from under Mason's nose. I didn't gloat, didn't post about it, didn't even tell my closest friends. I just added a photo to my office wall, the one from that Thursday in the boardroom. Me, sitting across the table facing an empty chair. That chair, it was always meant for me. They just couldn't see it. Yet, success is loud, but power, true power, is silent. And in that silence, I was building something they'd never see coming. After we stole that first contract from Halton Logistics, yes. Stole, I didn't toast. I didn't buy champagne. I sat at my rented desk, stared at the blinking cursor on my screen, and whispered one down. Because it wasn't about revenge. It was about reinvention. It was about building a future so unshakable, even the past couldn't stain it. I named the internal division Obsidian. It wasn't in the public records. It didn't show on any org chart. But Obsidian was mine. A ghost team. 4 engineers. 2 data scientists. 1 retired operations VP who used to work for our biggest competitor and knew exactly where they bled. Together, we built a silent weapon, Althea Core, a logistics intelligence system that didn't just route trucks. It predicted market collapse. It forecast warehouse shortages before they happened. It turned chaos into choreography. And while Halton Inc. Baconier was still using spreadsheets in mahogany offices, we were mapping the world in code. By year 2, we had 8 clients. By year 3, we controlled over 11% of the regional freight market. But I still didn't put my name on anything. Not yet. I stayed behind closed doors, watched from security cameras, let my COO take the press. Because the moment they knew it was me, the moment they recognized the girl they fired, I wanted it to be too late. People asked why I never went public, why I never sued, why I didn't expose the way they cut me out, stole my proposals, blackballed me from industry events. But see, a public feud is for amateurs. It gives them power. It turns your victory into noise. I didn't want noise. I wanted dominance. Then came the day the market trembled. One of Halton's top clients, New Star Pharmatech, announced a shift. They were moving their logistics contract to an unnamed tech-based operator. The whispers started. Who's backing this company? Where did they come from? How are they this good? Mason made a press statement, brushing it off. Uncle Lawrence called it a temporary blip, but they felt it. The shift, like a crack in the ice under their feet. And me, I was already skating across. Behind the scenes, I negotiated 5 silent partnerships. I didn't want billboards. I wanted backdoors. We began offering white label infrastructure to the very companies that supplied Halton Inc. They didn't know their vendors were now mine, that their supply chains were crawling with Althea fingerprints. They didn't know that their packages were being tracked by my software, their trucks rerouted by my AI. I was in their house, through the walls, watching, measuring, waiting. And yet, I never stopped working like I was still in that dusty warehouse. I slept 3 hours a night, ate at my desk, read contracts like bedtime stories, listened to old voicemails from my father when the nights got cold and long. He once said, "Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you prove while you're still breathing." So I kept proving. It was during a quarterly check-in when my CFO looked up and said the words that stopped my pulse. You know, we're big enough to buy them. Halton. My family's company. I didn't say anything at first. Just let the silence fill the room. By them I had been playing chess so long. I hadn't realized I was already in checkmate. I nodded. Let them come to us first, I said. Because it wasn't enough to buy them. They had to ask for help. They had to knock on the door of the daughter they locked outside. And almost like I conjured it from thin air, the email arrived. Subject line: partnership opportunity with Halton Inc., signed by Mason R., Halton Vice President, Strategic Growth. I stared at it. 3 minutes, no blinking. Then I hit forward to my team, to legal, to myself, and I wrote beneath it, "Let's set the table." A week later, I sat in a high-rise conference room across from the boy who had once told me to pursue something smaller. He didn't recognize me at first. The hair was different, the clothes sharper, the silence heavier. But the eyes. Oh, Mason remembered those eyes. He blinked, froze, smiled that nervous, twitchy smile people wear when they realize they're standing in front of the person they underestimated and lost to. Elara, he finally said. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The contracts on the table said enough. The Althea branding embossed in silver. The numbers, the terms, all of it. Proof, receipts, domination. I let him pitch, let him talk about synergy and modernizing workflows. Meanwhile, I watched Uncle Lawrence behind him, old, tired. The man who once said I lacked the aggression for leadership. Now he sat across from the girl who built an empire in silence. And the best part, they still thought they had a choice. When the meeting ended, I stood first, shook their hands like they were interns, thanked them for considering us. Then I leaned in close to Mason and whispered, Next time, don't fire the person who knows how the whole engine runs. He didn't answer. He just swallowed his pride and walked out of my boardroom, into the company his father built, that I now controlled. That night, I walked the empty halls of Althea, passed by the obsidian wall our internal map of takeover targets, and I took out a pin, one red marker, one word Halton, acquired, and then, under my breath, like a secret prayer only I was meant to hear, 2 down. You know what's worse than being betrayed, being forgotten, but the most dangerous people in the world are the ones you forget, because you assume they'll never rise again. 3 months after that meeting with Mason and Lawrence, things got quiet, too quiet. They hadn't signed the deal. Not yet. They said they'd review internally and circle back in Q2, but I already knew the truth. Their silence wasn't strategy, it was panic. Because here's what they didn't realize, every minute they waited, we got stronger. Althea wasn't just a competitor anymore. We were dominant. We weren't selling services. We were selling certainty. Our system guaranteed 18% faster delivery, 23% lower shrinkage, and thanks to Obsidian's intel, nearly zero supply disruption in a sector that lived and died on chaos. We weren't chasing contracts. They were chasing survival. I got the call on a rainy Thursday. It always rains on my days of reckoning. I was in the middle of a pitch in Munich when my assistant whispered, It's Mason Halton. He says it's urgent. I excused myself, walked into the hallway, answered with silence. Elara, Mason's voice cracked. We'd like to revisit the deal. Ah, there it was. The shift, the crumble, the moment when pride folds in on itself. We scheduled the meeting for the following week, but this time, I didn't come alone. I brought my entire executive board. I wanted witnesses, not to humiliate them, not to make a scene, but because this was history and history needs to be recorded. The boardroom we met in was Althea's flagship tower, floor 43, glass walls, sleek black marble, the kind of room where you walk in and immediately know who holds the crown. Mason and Lawrence were already there when I arrived. Lawrence stood as if reflexively expecting me to bow. I didn't. I sat, crossed my legs, folded my hands, and waited. Mason looked thinner, not physically, emotionally. His voice trembled as he spoke Elara. We've seen the numbers. Your platform is revolutionary. We'd like to explore a full acquisition. I raised an eyebrow. You want to acquire Althea? He nodded. I smiled. Then I laughed, not mockingly, not cruelly, just honestly. No, I said softly, you misunderstood. We're acquiring you. The silence that followed was thick, viscous, the kind of silence that chokes. Lawrence's face turned a slow, steady red. Elara. With all due respect, I raised a finger. Just one. He stopped. Respect. They fired me like a secretary. They erased my name from every memo. They laughed behind my back in boardrooms I used to clean at 5 a.m. And now, respect note, they didn't get my respect. They got my terms. I slid a folder across the table. Inside, a complete breakdown of Halton's financial bleed-out. A side-by-side analysis of supply chain gaps. Employee retention charts, offer terms. I wasn't there to negotiate. I was there to rescue their legacy, just long enough to own it. We will retain the Halton name for 12 months during transition, I said. After that, all branding will shift to Althea Global. Lawrence bristled. You can't erase 100 years of family legacy. I looked him in the eye. Watch me. Mason was silent. I could see it in his eyes. The regret, the slow, crushing realization that the girl he called small had become the storm that drowned them. They signed. Of course they did. Because pride doesn't pay salaries. And regret doesn't fix cash flow. And when desperation knocks, even the arrogant answer the door. After the ink dried, I walked them to the elevator. Mason looked like he wanted to say something, so I let him. Elara, he began. I never thought I stopped him with one sentence. You should have. Then the doors closed, and he was gone. Back in my office, I opened the old gray blazer, the one I wore the day they fired me, still hung on the same hook, still clean, still waiting. I put it on, sat at my desk, and whispered to the empty room, 3 down. I didn't announce the acquisition publicly, not yet, because the victory wasn't in headlines. It was in the shift. Every Halton executive that came into Althea now answered to the girl they once dismissed, and I watched them all one by one swipe their new key cards. Same suits, same names, new empire, new queen. What I did next wasn't about revenge, it was about rewriting the script. I appointed a former warehouse manager as VP of Ops. I doubled maternity leave. I rebuilt the intern program from scratch, focusing on students without family connections. And I did something no one saw coming. I created a new chair in the boardroom. Not for me. For the next girl they'd call too quiet, too small, too ambitious. She wouldn't need to ask for a seat. Because I already built it. Power doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it enters the room so quietly, you don't even know you've been conquered until you're already working for the person you tried to erase. 1 month after the papers were signed, I walked the halls of Halton Inc., now rebranded on every letterhead as a subsidiary of Althea Global. It was strange, familiar, but foreign, like walking through a childhood home after it's been gutted and remodeled. Same walls, different ghost. The employees didn't know what to make of me. Some stared, some whispered, some lowered their eyes like they were ashamed to meet the gaze of a woman they once saw sweeping the loading dock. I let them whisper. Because when a new queen enters the palace, the wise don't speak too soon. The first thing I did, I found the dusty conference room where I was once fired. I had it remodeled completely. The long mahogany table, gone. The stiff leather chairs burned. I replaced it all with open space, glass, light. But one thing remained, a single photo. Me. The day I walked out, back straight, eyes calm, a box in my hand, no tears on my face. I framed it and hung it on the main floor. No caption, no plaque, just presence. They asked me if I wanted Mason gone, if I wanted to push him out, humiliate him, strip his name from the employee roster like he once stripped mine. But I said no. I gave him a choice. Stay, I told him. But know this. You now work in the company built by the girl you laughed out of the room. He looked at me, unsure, waiting for the catch. The knife. But I had none to offer, because true power doesn't stab, it elevates. And letting him stay under me, that was the loudest silence of all. I reassigned him to a team led by a woman named Nari, brilliant, young, Korean-American, used to be overlooked in every promotion cycle. She had a framed email from HR saying, "Not yet leadership ready." I promoted her to Director of Innovation. And Mason. He reported to her now. Balance restored. Uncle Lawrence didn't last long. He called a meeting 2 weeks into the acquisition, said the new direction felt foreign, said we were abandoning core family values. I let him speak, every word. Then I handed him a file. Inside the quiet payouts he'd authorized to cover up failed audits, the shadow suppliers siphoning funds, the broken promises he made to employees. His face turned the same color it did the day I gave him my terms. He resigned quietly that night, left behind his keycard and his legacy, both useless now. Some called me ruthless, some called me cold, but I was neither. I was measured, intentional, patient. Because I knew if I moved too fast, I'd become what they were. And I wasn't here to mirror the past. I was here to dismantle it. On the day we officially merged all systems, I hosted a company-wide town hall. I stood in front of over 600 employees, some new, some old, all uncertain. I told them three things. 1. You belong here because of your work, not your bloodline. 2. 3. This company will never again fire someone for being too much. 4. 5. If you were overlooked before, this is your era. 6. And then I did something no CEO had ever done in that room. I walked into the back row, sat beside the custodial staff, ate lunch with them, listened. Not because it was PR, but because I'd been them. And I wanted them to know I never left. I just rose. By Q4, revenue was up 38%. Employee turnover had dropped to historic lows. We were named one of the most ethically reformed empires by 2 major journals. But none of that made me proud. What did was walking past that photo every morning, the one where I looked so small, and knowing I never needed to scream to be heard. One afternoon, I found a letter slipped under my door, handwritten, no signature. It said, "You've become what we never had the courage to imagine. Thank you for building what they never let us dream." I never found out who wrote it. Maybe someone in HR, maybe a former intern, maybe the woman in the mailroom who once handed me my severance. But that letter, that was my trophy. You see, they thought they were burning me alive. What they didn't realize was that I was the fire. And I never wanted revenge. Not really. I wanted restoration. I wanted dignity. But above all, I wanted to prove that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's just the sound you make while building something the world isn't ready for. Yet, there's a kind of silence that feels heavy. The kind that wraps around your shoulders like armor. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. I live in that silence now. And I've never felt more whole. The merger was complete. The headlines had come and gone. The articles with dramatic titles: "Fired Heiress Becomes Empire's New Queen," "The Fall of Halton," "The Rise of Winters." Funny how the world only looks when the story twists hard enough. They weren't there when I was sweeping floors, rewriting code at 3 a.m., eating instant noodles in a secondhand office chair with one wheel missing. But they're watching now, and they call it a comeback. But this was always becoming. I never changed my name, but I did change the companies. Althea Global became the Winters Group, not because I wanted the spotlight, but because I wanted to honor the one person who never doubted me even when I had no voice in the room. My father. He didn't leave me shares. He left me something better: the fire to earn every square inch of my kingdom. We built a legacy on ashes, not out of spite, but out of steel. And with that came the final decision, the one I held off until everything else was done. The boardroom, that room, the one where I was erased. We kept the space, but not the function. It became the founder's room, not for meetings, for stories. Every wall was turned into a living archive. Photos, quotes, failure memos turned into framed lessons. And one glass display, untouched, in the center. Inside, my first severance letter, the key card they deactivated, the blazer I wore on my last day, and a single quote etched into the glass: "Let them bury you. Just don't forget to grow." I still remember the first time Mason walked past it. He stopped, read everything, didn't say a word, and I didn't need him to. Because closure doesn't always come from apology. Sometimes it comes from watching the people who hurt you realize they were wrong and have to live with it. A few weeks later, Mason requested a private meeting. He sat across from me. No smirk, no arrogance, just stillness. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I want you to know, I see you now." I nodded, not out of grace, out of recognition. "Good," I said. "Then maybe next time you'll recognize the next girl who doesn't fit your mold." He swallowed, then asked, "Why didn't you fire me?" I leaned back, looked him dead in the eye. "Because firing you would have been easy, but making you see me every day, that's how you change people." Not long after, he stepped down voluntarily, moved out of state. I heard he started over small town, quiet job. Maybe that's what he needed. As for Lawrence, he never spoke to me again, and honestly, that silence felt like justice. But my story doesn't end with revenge. It ends with a gift. Not for them. For the girl I used to be. The one in the blazer, box in her arms, heartbroken, but not beaten. I created a fund called the Second Seat. Every year, we find young women from underrepresented backgrounds, especially the ones who were told you don't belong in business. We give them mentorship, equity, a seat, not because they begged for one, but because someone should have built the damn table for them sooner. Last month, I visited the warehouse where I once worked. Same cold concrete floors, same musty smell of oil and cardboard. Only now, it bears a new plaque outside. Elara Winters Distribution Center. I didn't attend the unveiling ceremony, didn't cut a ribbon, didn't pose for press. I just came the next night, alone, touched the wall, and whispered, "We did it." Because that's the beauty of building in silence. No one sees you coming. And by the time they do, you've already arrived. I don't tell the story out of bitterness. I tell it because someone, somewhere, is sitting in a boardroom today, being told they're too young, too ambitious, not quite the right fit. And if that's you, here's what I'll say. Let them fire you. Let them forget you. Let them laugh. Then go build something so unshakable that one day they'll beg you for a seat and you'll decide whether to give them one